you can help prepare yourself for the end of life by finding that place in yourself that's quiet and empty, that's really you. Or you don't have to do that. Nobody has to get prepared. But if you don't, and you never give it any thought or intention, then the dying process will do the letting go for you, because that's what happens in dying. You just got to let go, and you have no choice. And so it may be that you can prepare a bit by finding who you really are, so that you don't have everything stripped away by force when you get to that point in time when it's going to happen, no matter what you want. You may be able to prepare a little bit that way, but don't hope to not be afraid, because you can't live in a body and not dread losing your body.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I have a really interesting guest today. I can't wait for you to meet him. Just want to remind you that you can join my email list at thespiritualforum.org, and you can also donate. And please do things like rate and review on Apple Podcasts, and also subscribe on YouTube. So, my guest today is Brad Stuart. He's a physician specializing in end of life care, a healthcare system innovator, an author, and an international speaker. He created the first large scale advanced illness management program in the US to care for the seriously ill at home. Brad was featured in HBO's Letting Go, A Hospice Journey. He's also been recognized as Physician of the Year by the California Association of Health Services at Home and declared a visionary by the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. His book is called Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life. And it shows how he came to discover that reality is not what we think, and death is not the end of who we really are. Welcome, Brad.
Well, hi, Carol. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to be with you too. I just so look forward to this conversation because death is something that is either something we completely 100% ignore, or we kind of like stay really focused on it and we're really afraid of it. So I think today I'm hoping that you release people's fears about death, and that we really have a transformative conversation for people. But first, let's do our rapid fire questions just to get to know you a little better. And I'd like to start with you sharing a person in your life, anybody, you can just pick one, who has been a particular inspiration to you.
Wow. Well, I've got to pick my wife.
Yeah.
I dedicated my book, Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender, to her, because she's just really connected. And we've been together 30 years, give or take. She's a nurse. I met her while we were both working in the same hospital. She has done hospice in the past. I did hospice for years, and she just is. She's just special in a particular way. She's just connected. So I got to list her as
Awesome.
my major inspiration, even though we don't always see eye to eye. But that's what
We
happens when
don't.
you're.
You're the
No,
only couple I know that doesn't see eye to eye.
you gotta. If you're going to be a successful couple, you have to know how to resolve your differences.
Yeah, you got to live with them. Did you guys work together?
We did. In between my internal medicine practice, which I did 24/7 for over 10 years, I worked in my office, the hospital, the ICU, and then, we'll probably get into this, but I decided to go full time into end of life care, and it doesn't pay very well, especially at first. So I had to figure out a way to make a living to support my family. So I took a job as the head of a team of physicians at a little country hospital in the next county north from where I live. I'm in Sonoma County, California, which is pretty rural. This county was really rural. So a team of doctors, we would take turns, spend a week at a time. And I met Barbara because she was the discharge planner at that hospital. So I would get the patients ready to go home, assuming they could do that. Not all of them could. And we would work together. And it got to where when she knew I was coming for my week-long shift, she would get the patients ready to talk to me because once she learned my way of talking with patients, she kind of knew how to get everybody prepared. And we just got closer and closer that way, and that was 30 years ago. So it's been an amazing journey together.
It's an amazing story. I love that. So thank you for that. I do know we'll get more into that. The next question I have for you is you're a physician and you talk differently than any physician I know, and your book really talks about spirituality and the spiritual path. So would you be able to define what the spiritual path or spirituality is from your viewpoint?
Well, it's funny. I was maybe because I knew we were going to talk. I was thinking about this morning, and I spent a lot of time after my medical practice. And after I became a hospice medical director, I kind of got kicked upstairs a series of times until I was the senior medical director at a huge medical system here in Northern California. And I remember I used to teach hospice staff all over the system, and we covered the entire northern half of the state. And I remember teaching people in hospice that it's important to bring heaven down to earth. And I wasn't talking in religious terms. I was just saying, when you work with people who are really sick and dying, it's really important to embody or kind of radiate or have inside you what is real and who you really are as you work with folks who are ready to make the transition. And after I retired, which happened just a few years ago, I realized, I think I'll write a book about um, that, what we call heaven when I said bring heaven down to earth. What really is that? Who are we really? And what are we learning actually through research now on near-death experiences that happen a lot in ICUs these days? What are we learning about where our awareness may go when we die? What is that other level or place or dimension, whatever you want to call it? And I decided I wanted to delve more into that, and there's no better way to do that than to write a book. So that's what I did, and that's where facing death. The first part's about all kinds of people I've faced death along with. And then the second part is about my own take on who we actually are inside and what the meaning may be of what we think reality is versus what maybe it actually is that we only discover after we leave this life and move on to whatever comes next.
Okay, so it sounds like to you, the spiritual path is that discovery of who we really are in this life, hopefully now, versus when we're waiting until we die. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, yeah. I think the spiritual path for an individual person is the practice of however it occurs to you, the person, to find that place in yourself that's underneath who you really are. You find in the book I refer to who we really aren't as the self. The self. I mean, everyone basically is in this life when you're living in a body and living your daily life and functioning as well as you can, you have to be living within yourself. Know thyself. I mean, the Greeks, a couple thousand years ago, they were really onto something where they said, know thyself. The oracle at Delphi had that carved over the entrance to her cave. Knowing yourself is critical if you want to survive and thrive in this world. However, I mean, Buddha, it was no accident that Buddha said, hey, wait a second, be really careful about taking in the world and believing that yourself is the arbiter of what's really true, because it's not. It's not yourself that knows what's true. It's something deeper than that. And in the book, I just refer to it as the I am, just for lack of a better term. There's all kinds of different baggage-laden terms that we use in spiritual life and practice to refer to it, but it's just the place that's way down deep where all you are is aware. You're not thinking, you're not acting, you're not reacting, you're just aware. And that, I think, in my opinion, that's what meditation is really all about, is finding that place where it's just empty and quiet. And there's lots of, Zen Buddhism is all about that. There's lots of specific practices that can help you find that place. But the important thing in regular life is to know that you got to be onto yourself, because that's the only way you can live a successful life. But be careful about believing that that's all you are, because it's
Hmm.
just not true.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's quite a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's no accident that I had to wait. I waited 50 years to write this book. I wanted to write it when I was a third year medical student. I had a desperate need to talk about why we were missing the mark in our medical system. And it took me 50 years to really get to where I felt like I could write what I really needed to write.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into the medical system. But I've got one last rapid fire question, and that is, can you share what your hope or vision is for the world?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is I don't really have. I mean, I could, if I center in myself and I get into what I think about day to day about the political situation and, how things
Don't
are.
think about that.
Well, I'm answering your question because
Yeah.
I have lots of hopes for the world about
Yeah.
how we could learn as a human race to cooperate. We could do all the things to pursue peace and sources of energy that make sense. There's all kinds of wishes that I would have about how the world ought to turn out. But in a spiritual sense, I think it's the truth that this world just exists, um, so that we come here and we learn. And if you really follow people's lives all the way through to the end with them, and you hear their stories and you know where they're coming from, you know their history, you know how they're feeling, you've kind of gotten close to them. And as they actually leave, after doing that a bunch, you begin to realize that it doesn't actually matter what
Mm,
happens in this life. I mean, it's matters, it's everything while we're here. But when we leave, we let go of all of that, of everything. That's why dying is so challenging, because you got to let go of everything, everything you held dear your whole life. It's one by one, or all at once. In some cases, those things just you got to let go. And so, wishes for this world, I've got a million of them. But I don't have any particular deep spiritual wish for the world, because the world's going to go on however it
mm,
goes. And all the suffering, all the what we call evil, all the unkind things people do, all of that is part of what's necessary, and or what is, and what we need to learn to deal with while we're here. It's all important. And, so I don't have any wish to change that. I don't think that there's any way we can change that. We can just be the best we can be and be kind to those we meet. And, that on our level as individuals, that's the wish I have, that we treat each other well.
Okay, thank you. We really got deep into that. I asked you some pretty deep questions, so thanks for diving in.
Well,
Uh,
if those are your quick questions, I can't wait to hear your other ones.
yeah, I watched a Jimmy Fallon YouTube video last night, and he does rapid fire questions like, "What's your favorite color?" I'm
Yeah.
like, "Whoops, I maybe should be asking questions like that."
Aquamarine. How about
Yeah, right. Green, no blue. Okay. Well,
that?
Brad, I'm so fascinated by your life. You've seen so much of people and what they go through. And I'd like to hear your story a little bit about how you became a doctor specializing in end of life care. I don't know very many doctors who speak so eloquently about spirituality and about this dimension of humanity. And so I'm really curious about your journey to get to where you are. And did you start off as a regular old doctor who it was kind of immersed in the material like most of them, or did you kind of start off more on the spiritual track? So why don't you share a little bit about your journey?
Well, I'm 76 years old now, and I grew up. I graduated high school in 1967, which was, if you recall, that was the summer of love in San Francisco. But I was in Pennsylvania, so I was a continent away from
Oh, I
that.
lived in California then.
Well, I had a close group of friends in college that I still get on Zoom with every Sunday. We've known each other however many years that is. We're still close, and we talk about whatever enters our minds. It's nothing. But anyway, we got very close in college because in the late 60s, early 70s, something was coming into the world that hadn't been around for maybe a long time. And, the summer of love was the year I graduated high school, and then that all changed. But we all got very close. And I went from there. We actually, a number of us lived on a farm together for 2 or 3 years in our last few years of college. And I went from there to medical school. I left the farm and went back to the city in Philadelphia and had a couple of research jobs because I just really loved science, and published a couple of papers in brain imaging research. And those papers got me into Stanford Medical School. So I moved to California in 1974, I think, and began medical training. And I was just elated the first couple of years. I mean, if you're into knowledge and learning, which I was and still am, there's nothing like the first 2 years of medical school, especially at an elite high level institution like Stanford, where they would spend money to bring Nobel Prize winners in to lecture to us. And I was inspired. I couldn't believe, I had to pinch myself. It was so amazing being there. Then my third year came, and in the third year of medical school, you go on the wards in the hospital and start seeing patients. And I decided to do my first clerkship. That's what they call your clinical rotations as a medical student, um, on East 1A, which at the time at Stanford was the internal medicine ward of the hospital, the academic ward, where all the professors saw their patients that they saw in private practice, and the house staff, the students, interns, residents, would work with them on those patients, and that's how you learn. So, my very first patient was a very seriously ill gentleman with terrible cancer. And this story, I believe, is chapter one in my book because it was central to my career. I could see right away, I knew nothing other than, a bunch of textbook learning about illness. And yet I could see, I was sure that this gentleman looked like he was pretty close to death. And yet he was set up to get very powerful chemotherapy on a research protocol. And I had a lot of questions about that. So I asked my resident, is this right what we're doing? It seems to me this gentleman's going to die soon, or else we're going to kill him even quicker with this chemo because it's so potent. It's designed to kill off everything in your bone marrow and hope that the good cells come back. Are we doing the right thing here? And he just laughed at me. He said, you got to get it through your head. This place is Mecca. People come here to be cured. And until you understand that, you won't get anything out of being here. And not only that, if you ask a lot of questions, you're going to get yourself in trouble because those questions don't work here. And so I could have just shut up and, you know, followed orders. But instead, I went to the chief resident and said, I think we need to call a meeting. I mean, I'm only a third year student, but we need to call a meeting and talk about this. And so the chief resident said, okay. So half an hour later, I go to the meeting room and it's packed because everybody had heard about this. News travels fast. And there were all kinds of professors with white coats. The dean of the medical school was sitting right in the front. And the chief said, Stuart, you got problems with this case. Why don't you tell us what they are? So I stood up and I was terrified. But I said, I just have two questions here. Number one, is this right what we're doing? Because, we could very well kill this gentleman with our treatment. Should we do this or should we not? And I said, then my second question is, shouldn't we talk with him and his wife about what they are about to go through? Because they have no idea about any of this. And they came here, partly for answers. And so that second question stumped everybody. It was totally quiet. Nobody said anything. The meeting broke up. The chief caught me in the hall a few minutes later and said, we're going to treat him. So I said, okay, I'd like to give him the chemo myself. And he looked at me and said, why? The nurses do that. And I said, no, this is a learning experience for me. And I don't yet know what I'm going to learn, but I'm here to learn. And so I did. I mixed up the chemo myself and put it into his IV. He was barely talking at that point. Next morning, I come in, and the bed is stripped down, patient's gone, wife had left. And so I went to the resident, what happened? And he said, well, he died overnight. He dropped his platelets down to zero. That's the blood clotting cells your bone marrow make. And he bled into his brain and died. And that's what happens. And he didn't bat an eye. So I was horrified
Mhm.
because I knew it would happen. Not only that, I did it on purpose. Just to see what it felt like because I had a feeling that it would happen. And that set me off on course to number one, learn as much as I could about medicine and treating patients, especially sick ones. And number two, how does this system really work? How do we decide as physicians what's it's right to do and what's the right way to decide? And where do we go with people when they're so ill that we may harm them with our treatment? What do we do then? Because nobody talked about that. And that's why I went into practice full time, 24/7 on call all day and night for 10 years to learn that. And the answer I came up with is I got to focus on people at the end of life. That's where the action actually is, and that's where the healing can take place when the curing doesn't work anymore. And Took me 10 years to figure out that's what the question really was. And I just went on from there.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I want to pause for a minute here because, first of all, I just have to say, I think it's amazingly bold of you as a young person, bringing this to the attention to your superiors. I mean, most people wouldn't do that. Most people would just follow the protocol and just do stuff and not even raise a hand and ask the question. And the question should have been asked, and it was asked. The other observation I have is this family and how much people trust the medical establishment. They trust their doctors. They trust, the hospital personnel to bring the right solutions to them. And nobody really knows what questions to ask, but there's this ultimate trust that I think is it's kind of a sacred trust that I think is not always honored on the part of the medical establishment. I just really feel so sad from this story for this man and his wife. And then third, you were horrified, and you should have been horrified. Any normal human would be horrified. We should all be horrified by what happened there, because really you're kind of being deprived of being fully aware of what your choices are and my transition and prepare and all of that. But I think what happens is we get so numb. And I can imagine that doctors would get so numb to life and death, life and death, life and death. There's just another one. And we lose our humanity. And being horrified is the human response. We should all be just so sad about that story. And I remember reading it. I was very, very touched by it. Again, most people wouldn't respond like you did. Most people would just get used to it and get in file, get in line and do what needs to be done. And what can I do to make the most money? So for some reason, you felt this or heard this or answered this calling to go into a completely different medical field where you were required to really, really open your heart and be a human with other people and listen. So I'm so impressed by that, especially at such a young age.
Well, I guess thank you. I appreciate that. I just, I think I just have a stubborn streak, honestly. I mean, I felt that certain things were important, and I looked around and nobody else felt the same way. And I noticed that the more training the doctors around me had, the more insensitive they seemed to be. And what I came to the conclusion that medical training trains out of you the urge that you come into medicine with, because I came into medicine because I wanted to learn how to really help and to heal. And boy, since then, I've talked to and taught so many medical students, residents. I've given talks to roomfuls of doctors, hundreds of talks across the United States and Europe, other places. And I still feel the same way that, and this is a two-edged sword. I think it's like I was just talking to a resident yesterday or the day before who's going into her palliative care fellowship, and she got in touch with me because she wants to do a project and study it using research methods to see if it's effective to change the way family practice doctors treat people who are really ill. So, and she wants to do that because she's not satisfied either with the way she sees her own family practice colleagues treating patients. So here we are, what, 50 years later, and it
Mm.
still is an issue, and it will always be an issue because one purpose of medical training, this is the two-edged sword part, one purpose of being put through what you get put through in medical training, no sleep for 2 nights in a row. It's not as harsh as it used to be, but it's really a harrowing experience. You get things thrown at you. You're forced to make up your response based on what you've been taught. You may make mistakes, and if you do, you're forgiven. But the point of that harshness is to temper you as a person so that eventually you get to where you can pretty much handle whatever comes at you. I mean, I've gone back. I started out working in the emergency room before I opened my practice and went back again to the emergency room when I was in between my practice and hospice just to make ends meet. And, you do get to the point where you can deal with anything. And I really mean anything, as you can't imagine how horrible situations can be until you work in the emergency room for a while. It's and see what comes at you. And but you have to be able to handle it. You can't fail and get scared or panic or walk away. You just can't. I was in emergency rooms where there was no backup anywhere around close by. I had to handle everything. And that's what medical training is for. It's to purposely desensitize you so that you can handle whatever comes your way. And that aspect of it is useful. The part that's difficult is to keep your humanity and your heart open while you're being desensitized. And remember that the people that you're facing, uh, some of whom are really, many of whom are really suffering and really afraid. You have to remember to be able to sit down on their level, look them in the eye and say, how are you? And, I've got a story in the book about making rounds one Sunday morning and meeting a patient who I was making rounds for many other doctors that weekend because we traded calls. So once in a while we get a weekend off. I'd never met her before, and I could tell she was really in an extreme place. So I stopped. I had 32 patients to see that morning, and I stopped and said, "How are you?" And I was kicking myself as I did that because I knew I'd never get home to see my kids until late that night. They'd be in bed by then. And you can read the story in the book, but I just think it's important to stay human, and it's not easy to do. I do know doctors who manage it. They really do a great job, but you have to be aware and you have to be stubborn, I think, because it's so easy to go down a path where you close yourself off and you close your heart and your feelings off just so you can function. The irony of that is, I think that's the fastest road to burnout. Burnout's a terrible problem. Physician suicide is a terrible problem. And I think it's cutting yourself off, leads
Mm-hmm.
to burnout quicker than keeping yourself open. At least that's my experience. But then again, like I said, I think I'm unusually stubborn, so I don't know what
You're unusual in a
role
lot
that
of
plays.
ways. I've never heard a doctor talk like this. It's hard to live in this life. It's hard to live in this life, whether you're a doctor or not, just being facing the realities of what's going on across the planet and the suffering and the war and all of that, and to keep your heart open so that you can feel all of that, but also be able to put one foot in front of the other to live your life and love your family. And we all want to protect our hearts because it hurts so much when we feel so much or we see so much tragedy. So I think, we were talking about what's life all about. I think that's one of our challenges, one of our things that we're here to learn, how to be with the way everything is, and somehow be okay with it, and from a place of having our heart open, because it's easy to be with it all when your heart is closed. And I know for myself that there are times I just close mine. I can feel it. I close it because that's just too much for me to bear. Something is too much for me to bear. So I can imagine that it would be very, very difficult for doctors to keep their hearts open. I'm very curious. You did mention that you've talked to rooms full of doctors and physicians and whatever. Do you talk to them about this?
Oh yeah. I mean, I The 10 years that I was in practice was in, a medium-sized town in Northern California in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, and I practiced there. All the doctors knew each other. All the doctors knew me and what I was about, and I think some of them had a lot of respect for what they knew I believed in. Others, in fact, they would tell me that, they would give me like constructive feedback, which
Mhm.
meant criticism
Mhm.
about some of my approaches because I didn't like calling specialists to see my patients unless I really needed that person to come in and do something specific. I would do a lot of it myself. And I got criticism for that because, the knee-jerk reaction is when you see somebody with lung problems, you send them off to the pulmonologist. And if they have a heart problem, you send them off to the cardiologist. And I never felt great about that. I knew all the pulmonologists and cardiologists, and I worked in the ICU, so, that we all knew each other. But I just think that I wound up being in a good place with everyone that I worked with, especially when I went into hospice and still working in the same town, and got invited back to do grand rounds, which is the Friday afternoon or Friday lunchtime talk every week. And at this hospital where I worked, at the time, the doctor who ran grand rounds had a fund that everyone chipped money into, and he would invite speakers from sometimes far away to come into Little Santa Rosa and give talks to the doctors so we would all learn something. So he invited me twice to two different times to come in and talk to my colleagues about what I was working on and what I thought was important. And so I did. And it was the first time I was very frightened because I knew a lot of them knew me well enough to listen to what I had to say and kind of go, yeah, right. I mean, okay. What is this new age stuff you're talking about? I mean, so I decided that the best way to talk to doctors who are very well defended, and many of us are, we have strong defenses against having to feel.
Mhm.
Um, that's the easiest way to make it through your day is just don't feel. And like you said, be numb. I think a lot of doctors just do that unconsciously. So I decided that I would talk about uh, patients I had seen, some of these patients these other doctors had known, and ways that I approached it, and also I resolved that I would talk about what draws us all into medicine in the first place before we get that urge trained out of us. And so I tried doing that, and the way doctors are is you'll begin your talk and they're all back talking to each other, having side conversations, getting up and down to get lunch, chatting, standing in the back of the room, laughing and telling jokes to each other. And I thought to myself, I am going to do this talk in such a way that they will listen to me. That's what I want to do here. And so I did. About 15 minutes in, they had all sat down, and every eye in that place was on my face. And I knew that it wasn't me being a great speaker. It was that I had decided to talk about some things that really, really mattered to all of us, even though most of the time we never think about them. And I did an hour-long talk, and when it was over, a lot of my colleagues, some of whom never spoke to me much, came up and thanked me for giving the talk. And I remember one guy in particular, he was a short, in stature vascular surgeon. I used to call him Little Napoleon because in the OR he was anywhere he went, he was the commander.
Yeah.
Everybody listened to him and they were afraid of him. He came up to me and he had tears streaming down his face. This was a surgeon. I had consulted on one of his patients and talked his patient out of surgery. And he was really mad at me at the time. He came up with tears streaming down his face and he said, "Thank you so much for reminding me why I do this." And that's how you get underneath the defenses without assaulting them. You
Mm,
go to where people really live inside. And that's coincidentally, I think, what healing is all about. You follow the same path when you're with somebody who's suffering. Many people who have been suffering for a while, or maybe they're dying, or their family member is, they're armored because they feel so vulnerable. You got it. You can't, force your way through that. You have to ask questions and get underneath the defenses and up inside where people trust you, and then you can really be together. And that's when healing can actually happen. And by the way, I make this point several times in the book. When you're engaged in healing, you might think at first that, hey, I'm going to be a healer. But when healing is really happening, you can totally feel it. And you are healed just at the same time as you're engaged in healing with someone who's really suffering. And you don't ever get to know that unless you really engage with people who are in an extreme place and you're there with them. And something happens where at the end of the conversation they'll thank you, even though you might have delivered terrible news that they really didn't want to hear, but
mm.
they'll thank you. They'll have gratitude. And at that point, I would realize, wow, something just happened in me at the same time that it was happening in them. And it's really important. And if you don't get to experience that or you don't try it or notice it, it's just such a missed opportunity for everybody. And we could all, I mean, in the book, I mentioned that some bartenders and hairdressers are really good at this. You don't have
Hmm.
to be a doctor. You just have to know how to listen and how to engage in a non offensive way and be with somebody. And, that's and healing can happen. And it's for everybody. And it's really important.
Wow, I love how you described that. It's completely different than prescribing medicine and injections and treatments and stuff like that. Healing is completely different animal. Um, I don't want to lose sight of facing death. So let's talk about death. I could talk about the medical profession, could go on and on about that, but I'd like to know what have you learned about the process of dying that you can share with everybody who's listening today that might awaken us to something new.
Well, I guess the first thing that occurs to me is that um, the dying process and confronting it and thinking ahead and trying to imagine what it might be like and saying to yourself, I need to learn to deal with this. I'm not sure that's really possible to do. I think that until you yourself enter into that process, you can't know how you're going to feel. I know so many people who, some of them are very religious, some of them are complete atheists, some of them are very intellectual, some of them are not at all. But many of them will say, I'm not afraid of dying. I got it handled. That's what I was like until I got diagnosed with cancer myself. This was now about 20 years ago, and it got handled surgically, but I won't go into details about it. But I do tell the story in the book about how I reacted in myself when I was told I had cancer. And I was shocked at my own response. I really thought I had the death thing wired,
Mm.
and I didn't because you can't know how you're going to feel when you're told by somebody who knows that you're going to die, if things aren't done. And I've worked with so many people where there's nothing you can do. So number one, you can't think your way out of it. You have to go through it. Everybody goes through it. And the second thing maybe to note is that the dying process itself isn't difficult at all for most people. It's the getting to it and the dealing with the emotional, the holding on and the clinging that we all do to things that we know we're going to be forced to let go of. The whole secret, if there is one, to dying well, or having some kind of fortunate progress through that process, is to learn how to let go. And I
Mhm.
think we can find ways to practice that. I mentioned meditation before. I never had any luck meditating until I finally, after years, realized what it's actually about. It's not about sitting down and battling your mind and telling it to be quiet. It's about sitting down, noticing exactly where you are and how you feel, and then falling back a step and just noticing the part of yourself that's watching, that's just seeing and hearing and feeling. There's a place in you that's doing all that, and it's doing it by not doing anything. It's just it's just watching. That's you. That's who we are. And I think there are ways to practice. And you don't even have to call it meditation. I do it all the time. You know, when I wake up at 4 in the morning, not feeling so great about life or myself, I do it in the middle of the day when I'm just noticing. And I think if we learn to get more and more familiar with that place that's really who you are, that's underneath yourself. It's not your mind. It's not yourself. It's not your feelings. It's not your habits. It's not any of that stuff that you've learned or been taught the hard way or whatever. It's just the place that watches. If we find that place, um, I think, and we may talk about near-death experiences and what there is to learn from them.
Yeah, go
If
ahead.
there's, if there's a place, if there's a part of you that survives death and goes on, that's it. Um, it's that place that is empty. It's not that it's devoid of any content. I mean, you always remember what you were thinking and feeling, and people who die and are revived will come back and say, I popped out of my body. It wasn't hard at all, and I went on. Um, all the stories have elements in common, but I people will often see folks that they knew when they were alive. They'll Many of them, yeah, almost all, have some kind of life review where your time doesn't work the same way there that it does here. So it's not like a film where there's a beginning and an end. You see your entire life all at once, every second of it, and you just there is some kind of presence there with you who is just watching you and being with you very, very lovingly and gently and quietly as you react and respond to what happened in your life. Because you see it from your own perspective. You see every single thing you thought, felt, did, said from the perspective of the people who were with you and who you did it to.
Mm.
You see both of those and feel both of those at once. And some of those feelings are challenging. It's not that you're being judged because there apparently isn't any judgment happening from anywhere else but inside your own self. you as you're seeing what your life is. Many people who die and are revived and report out what they saw, they'll say things like, I am not the good person, the perfect person I thought I was. I did and said lots of things that really hurt other people, and I felt it. And, because they came back to continue their life, they almost all will say, I got to do better. You
Mm.
know, number one, I'm not afraid of dying anymore because I know now I know what it really is. And number two, thank God I got a little more time here because I need to do better than I was doing before. And it's the simplest things. It's not the big decisions that, it's not like me deciding to go to medical school that's important. It's the things that you don't even notice when you're doing
Yeah.
them. The way that you look at someone else, the way you go by someone in the street that you don't even know, and you either look at them and sort of say hi, or you ignore them and slough it off, those tiny little things. There's millions of them, and they
Mhm.
all matter. That's what people will say. So the bottom line, I think, is you can sort of help prepare yourself for the end of life by finding that place in yourself that's quiet and empty, that's really you. Or you don't have to do that. Nobody has to get prepared. But if you don't, and you never give it any thought or intention, then the dying process will do the letting go for you. Because that's what happens in dying. You just got to let go and you have no choice. And so it may be that you can prepare a bit by finding who you really are, so that you don't have everything stripped away by force when you get to that point in time when it's going to happen, no matter what you want. You may be able to prepare a little bit that way, but don't hope to not be afraid, because it's just part of, you can't live in a body and not dread losing your body. I don't think it's,
Mhm. Mhm.
some
Mhm.
very advanced people can do that. And now that I've been through some of it myself, maybe it'll be a little easier when I go through it for real, but I don't know. And I don't have to, because you can't know. So there's a
Let
few
go of that
random
too.
thoughts. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, let go of that too. So, I know some people, die very peacefully, and others, I think, really struggle. Do you, is in the work that you've been in end of life care, is there a pattern? Like, does everybody go through some similar process, or is every death very unique?
Well, every death is totally unique, I think, because it's very, very individual. You are facing what you've done, what you've made yourself into, and who you've become, in yourself. And so you must face that. Now, it is. Some people just breeze through and are able to be very peaceful about it. I have a friend who died about 2 years ago now, and he spent a lot of time in India, and he got cancer, and was able to keep it at bay for a while. But when he knew that he was not going to survive, he was very peaceful and straightforward about it. He had a very easy time, and I think that was uh, due, I guess, to his spiritual preparation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Other people who consider themselves really spiritual or religious have a much harder time. And I think some very religious people, um, I've seen it go both ways. Some people have incredibly strong faith, and it carries them all the way through to when they finally let go. Others uh, believe that they have the answer, and religion has given them certainty about certain questions that they don't have to ask anymore. And they may have a very hard time when they come upon the truth, which is, some of the things that they believe that miracles are going to happen and you will always be saved. There are certain beliefs that don't get fulfilled, and for some people that's very tough. So it's very hard to predict. It's hard to know, but yeah. So for some people it's fairly easy, and you'd be surprised. I mean, I know people who have done terrible things in their lives, and they have no conflict at all at the end. Other people
Hmm.
have been like very, very what you would call good people, and they've really had a struggle. I think it's for some people letting go is really tough.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see that letting go of our attachment to
yes,
the physical, to the material and
yeah,
people and everything. Yeah.
yeah. And if you're young, say you're a young mother with a couple of kids,
Yeah.
it's much harder than
Yeah.
if you've had a full life and everyone's been able to say goodbye and you're ready. So,
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about too is I know that when my mother it was a couple months before she passed, but she had broken her hip and she was in the hospital and I was there with her. And I remember my mother's not religious at all. And I remember her just suddenly looking up in the corner and saying, is that God? And
mm,
oh, there's an angel and it's so beautiful. Really interesting things like that, where it's like I think most doctors who are immersed in the material would say, well, she's just hallucinating. That's just what happens to the brain. She's hallucinating. It's some sort of effective medicine or something like that. But I do think it's not uncommon for people to see something or feel something at this was not exactly at end of life, but it was the beginning of the end for her. What is your experience of that?
well, that's very common. Many people will see folks that they knew, or angels, or Jesus, or, and of course, it's unique to every religious perspective. You'll see if you've personalized spirit into a person or a body, like if you believe in Jesus and the whole story that goes with that, you may see Jesus. And, that's very common. And I, I kind of get distressed that now that there are so many people, because we've gotten so good at resuscitation science and critical care, there are so many people in ICUs who have a cardiac arrest and are brought back, and they'll look at the nurse or the doctor and they'll say, "You won't believe what I just saw," and often they don't believe what
Yeah.
those people saw, or there's now research being done because there's so much data from people who have died and come back, uh, that it's all been categorized and studied. And there are papers and even books out there that try to find a physical reason for all of it. And there are others, and there are others in the medical profession who have a little more openness in their attitude about what it might really mean, that maybe it's not just brain chemistry, or maybe the brain chemistry is there in your brain in order to receive um, things, signals or frequencies that, when you're alive and functioning, it's like Aldous Huxley said, your brain is a filter, and it filters out 90% of what's coming to you so that you receive only those things that help you survive and thrive. And the rest of it you never are even aware of until you take LSD or psilocybin, and that opens some of the doors. We haven't talked about psychedelics, but they can be really, really valuable for many people if they're administered right. I mean, they can help you see through the mirror that yourself and your life and your body construct around your reality, so you can't see outside. that you can help get a pass through the looking glass with LSD or psilocybin. Maybe. I mean, many people have, especially, scientific studies on people who have cancer and incredibly intense death anxiety. 80% of them get a lot of relief from psilocybin when it's administered in the right way. 80%. There's no
That's
other drug.
huge.
There's
Yeah.
no other drug that I'm aware of that anybody has experience with that has that kind of success rate at relieving anxiety and desperation that's that intense. So it very, very useful. And how does it work? Well, I mean, I have a chapter in the book that gives you my opinions about it, and they're based on research. The references are in there. And I think it does have to do with the way our brains work. But the irony is that psilocybin works by turning your brain off, not by lighting it up, but it turns
Uh,
off the parts of your brain that probably are the ones that make you feel like you are a self. That gets shut down, and other things get to come through. And now that we've done a lot of research and the scales, the tools that we use to ask questions of people and record their responses and tabulate them and analyze them and all this stuff you do in research, the scales that are used to measure experiences with psilocybin and psychedelics, and the tools that are used to study people who come back from the other side after dying have really similar elements in them. I mean, there's a lot in common between what happens when you take psychedelics and what appears to happen when you die and come back. So, is that because your brain functions the same way either way, and your brain was? It's hard for me to believe that that's how our brain evolved in order to give us those experiences with the chemicals we have on board, and that's it. It's hard to know why we would have evolved that because it doesn't do you any good whatsoever
mhm.
and to survive and pass on your genes, which is kind of what powers evolution. So I can't buy that it's that simple, that it's just brain chemistry. It seems more reasonable to me, although science really has a hard time with this, that there is another level of, I don't know what to call it, reality that's different from earthly reality. And it's maybe where we come from and maybe where we go back to. And we're just, it's sounds very new agey and all that, but we come here and then we leave, and we may have done it millions or billions of times, and it's just to experience living in a body because it's a fabulous experience, I guess, if you're used to just being a spirit. I mean, coming here and living in a body, and even, I mean, there are people who say suffering is what many people come here to experience because you
Mhm.
can't experience it there. You can only experience it here. And it's seems so difficult when you're stuck in a body and you can't see or hear anything else. But from that bigger perspective, it may be that once you go through it and you leave and you look back, it was a beautiful experience no matter what it was. And that's why I don't have any particular wish about wanting to change the world, because I think the world kind of needs to be the place where you can experience a whole range of stuff. We call it good or bad, but I'm not so sure that in the ultimate eternal sense there is any good or bad. And I'm not trying to say that, yeah, evil is okay. It serves, that from an earthly perspective, that would be really stupid. But from a spiritual perspective, it all may serve a purpose. And, it's, I've wondered about that for a while, and now the data is really pouring in from a near-death experience and psychedelic studies that makes it look like we really have to rethink what what's actually real, because it
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
may be something that we haven't considered in science yet.
Yeah, I've always said when I was a minister of a church, I would always talk about there's two realities. There's a spiritual reality, and then there's the personal reality. And the personal reality is all the stuff that our personality thinks is happening. But there's something much bigger and broader and much more of a bigger, higher perspective going on, the spiritual reality, the spiritual truth, that we really can't always see when we're kind of looking so closely at what's happening to us. Okay, so Brad, this has been a great hour, and I want to make sure that you have the last words. Is there something that we did not cover? I mean, I could think, I could spend an hour talking to you about the medical business and what we can do to fix that. But what would you like to say to anybody who's listening today that we might not have covered?
Uh, no, I mean, it just pops into my head that it might be important to just before we leave on forgiveness,
Okay.
which is something that I personally have always had a big challenge from, forgiving, especially forgiving myself, because, I have done a lot of things. Like I said, I'm stubborn, and I have done a lot of things that I kind of, as I look back, I wish that I hadn't done or that I could undo. And of course, you can't. It's that's river has flowed on. But I think forgiveness is critical, and I don't know that it's really possible to actually forgive until we really learn how to let go of who we think we are. I think if you look at you, at, if I look at myself and my actions and my memories, and I start shaking my head, it helps to remember that all of those decisions and all those things that came out of myself and had an impact on other people uh, are things that in this life are critical. That's all this life is about, is learning to make better and better decisions. In the ultimate eternal sense, um, I can finally learn to begin to forgive myself, because those things usually, not always, were the best I could do at the time, and I know better now, and I know better because I know they were mistakes now. At the time, didn't dawn on me. So the it helps to get underneath who you think you are to the empty place where you really are, and then take a look back at yourself. And you may see a very different picture, and it may be a lot easier to live with uh, the things that are happening to you in your life and the things that you think you are, if you can see it from that different place, which may be where you are going to wind up seeing it from anyway, eventually. So might as well get some practice.
So do it now.
Do it
Those are very
now.
wise words. Yeah.
Start now. Yeah, you
Start
can't just
now.
jump into it. Takes a
Yeah.
while to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brad, I asked you a question about hope in the beginning, and I just want to say that just talking to you gives me hope about the medical profession, about possibilities for changing it so that we can make birth and death and everything in between more comfortable for people, and that we listen to people, and that we have our medical professionals have their hearts open. And I just see a possibility of that because I see that in you. And if you can do it, other people can do it. And so you've given me great hope in that way, because I have a difficult relationship with the medical profession, and you're helping
Yeah.
me heal it. So thank you for providing your wisdom, your heart, your experience, and hope for the future. So thank you for joining me today and sharing so openly. Um, and I also want to thank everyone for listening, because I know you were blessed by this conversation. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.